The next really important concept to understand is attributes. And I will explain what this means and why it's important. Let's go ahead and put down a test piece of geometry. So we're going to start with Pighead, which many people have seen before. I'm going to dive inside of our Pighead, and here he is. What you'll see is that if you middle click on the node, you're going to see a bunch of information here. It tells us the points, the primitives, the vertices, polygons, etc. And then it tells us about attributes. And what attributes are pieces of data that exist on geometry. They can exist on many different levels. They can exist on the point level. So here we see there's one point attribute called P, which is the position. It's the position of all of the points on our geo. We have a primitive attribute. Primitives are the larger pieces of geometry here. And that is where we have assigned a material. So the pig material is assigned to all the different primitives on this geo. And then we have vertex attributes. And the vertex attribute right now is our UVs. We also have groups here. We can see that there are groups of primitives for the eyes, the pig face, the pig neck, and the pig throat. There's some other information here, but we're not going to get into that. Additionally, if you hover over and you click this I button here, you'll get a nice pop-up window that has a lot of the similar information in here. You can click this lock button so that when you click out, this still stays up, or you can just disable that if all you want to do is interact with this here, and then when you click off, it goes away. So we can actually see the values of everything that's coming in here by right-clicking and going into a spreadsheet. And that will pop up this window that has a lot of useful information. We can also view the spreadsheet in different contexts, or you'll notice that we also have a geometry spreadsheet here that we can load that has the same information. It's not so useful to look at a geometry spreadsheet without actually seeing the geometry, so I usually will use a different kind of viewport or a different kind of desk arrangement when I want to look at it that way, or I will usually just launch the spreadsheet like this. Typically, I'm just launching the spreadsheet so that I can keep multiple spreadsheets open at one time and inspect things. So what we see here when we're looking at the spreadsheet are the attributes that are associated with this piece of geo. So for position, we have a position. We can tell there are 3 components to the position by this little bracket notation here. So the actual attribute is named P. When I middle click here, you can see that it's here, P, and it's made up of 3 values, 3 float values, floating precision. Floating precision meaning that they are not just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but they have decimal place precision in here. So it wouldn't work very well if we could only move this pig in units of 1, which is why we don't use something called an integer, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whole numbers. We use floating precision numbers here to store position data. And anyway, we can see that we have an X component, a Y component, and a Z component. So that shows us all the data. These are the point numbers. You can click here and actually display your point numbers so you can see basically which points align to which pieces of your geometry. Here we have our vertex information, and we can see that we have UV coordinates. It shows us what the UV coordinates look like. Here we have our primitives. And so primitives show us the material assigned to our geo and the full path to that material here. And then we can also see that there are groups here. So the way that the groups work is it has group and then the colon, and it's showing us the name of the group, and you're either in the group or you are out of the group. 1 means I'm in the group, and 0 means I am not in the group. As a further level up, you even have detail attributes. A detail attribute is an attribute that exists over the entire piece of geometry here. So what you'll see is when you author an attribute onto the geometry, you're authoring it onto prims, for example, it's going to author something onto all of the prims, whether you want that or not. If you author it onto detail, it will only author that value once. And this can be really useful for all kinds of things. Like, let's say you wanted to store just the bounding box information of this. Not every single point on your geometry or prim on your geometry needs to store the bounding box information for the whole piece of geometry. You might just want to say only the top level here needs to store that information. So it's very useful. Now we can add attributes in here as well. And remember, an attribute is just data. It's mostly arbitrary, but a lot of times it's meaningful. It depends what the data is meant to do and how it is meant to be interpreted. Right now, Houdini will interpret any data labeled as P as position data. It's going to interpret any data labeled shot material path as a string as a path to a material. These things are built into Houdini. But we can make our own data that does certain things. We can make data that does nothing. So I'm going to very quickly use an attribute wrangle to do this. You do not have to copy what I'm doing. This is for demonstration purposes only. I'm going to make a new piece of data, and it's going to be a point level data. So I'm running this over points, and here you can choose what you're going to want to run over. And I'm going to make a float attribute. So F is for float, A is for attribute, and we will call this test. Because this is a different coding language than HScript, it requires a semicolon to end this statement here. We are currently writing in Vex, which is an expression language inside of Houdini. It has some of its own rules. It's very similar to many other coding languages you might be familiar with, but for now, I'm simply going to say that to make an attribute, you want to use a format like this. You describe the type of attribute. In our case, it's a float. You use the @ symbol to signify it is an attribute you want to make, and then you give it the name of the attribute. So now I have made an attribute called test, but why can't we see it in here? Because we were looking at the spreadsheet for the geometry that's up here. So we'll right-click here, and we will do a new spreadsheet. And of course, that's a detail. So let's go ahead and change that to point value. And now we can see that we have this test attribute that is written in here. But all the values here are 0. So we can assign a value to that. So we'll say 1.234. And now every point gets that exact same value. Now you'll notice if I change this to primitives, it disappears here. And now it is a primitive attribute. And now if I change it to detail, it is now a detail level attribute, and we only see the value written once. Going back to points, I'm going to put this onto points. And now let's say that we wanted to make a unique value for every single point that's in here. So what I can do is pull in a certain variable that stands for the point number that's in here. So I will write at point num. Now this is a stored variable in Houdini. This is meaningful. It's not something that I've created. It's what you might call a hidden attribute. Excuse me. I think I labeled that variable. It's an attribute. It's a hidden attribute, but it is one that can be used. And now when I click off, what we're going to see is that we have values that match our point numbers. This can be very useful because we can do things like randomizing a value per point. So there is a function called rand where I can run that over a point. Basically say I want a random value between 0 and 1. And for my seed for that randomization, which means every time it calls this function, please give me a different number for that. I'm going to use the point number, and now we're going to get random values here. It can be very useful. However, what you'll notice is once I go to primitive mode here, and I go look at test, it might be a little funky. Did it actually match? I'm going to say number 2 here is 0.221. Let's go back to points. We got different values, and it's because once we go into primitive context here, it's not really aware of point numbers. There's another way to change this to be more generic, which is instead of calling points, to call the element number. And now we'll see that that is 0.417. If I go back to points mode here, it is 0.417, so they're going to match up. when I go to detail, it's going to be that as well. So that's going to be 0 because there is only one element here, which is labeled at 0. So if I fed 0 into here, you're going to see that we get the same number, right? All right. So I'm going to put this back to points, and we're going to talk a little bit about what this data is. Right now, it is absolutely meaningless. We're not doing anything with this data. It just exists. It's here, right? But we can do stuff with this data. I'll put down another attribute wrangle here. And what we can do is we can fetch in that piece of data that was called test. So I'm going to write at test just to know we're fetching that in. And what we're going to want to do is set our Y position to the current position that we're at, plus this new value of test. So the way we do that is I'm going to write V at P, because that is our position. V meaning it's a vector. It has 3 components to it. You can see there, 1, 2, 3. So this is V at P. And we're going to say plus equals, which is a kind of code-based shorthand for saying equals myself plus whatever comes after me. I also would like to grab just the Y component here. So to access that, we're going to say dot Y. So we're grabbing our position vector. We're only grabbing the Y component of it, and we're going to add test to that. And now you see we have displaced that pig geometry by this random data that we brought in. Now maybe this was a bit too strong. We can take this value here and multiply it by something like 0.1, right? And what we've done is just give a little bit of jitter in the Y coordinate to it. You'll see that data is all over Houdini. And when you put nodes down, it's going to add data all over. For instance, a color node here. We'll color our pig green. Now, we might not be aware of what's happening because we're just looking at something that happened in the viewport here. But if we go into our spreadsheet, we can see now that there actually is new data, new attributes attached to our geometry. In this case, a attribute called CD, which is Houdini's way of storing color information here. And it has 3 components. It has red, green, and blue. And you can see that we have set everything to full green in here. So green being 1, no red, and no blue in here. Now, I can grab this little selector here, and I can choose to select. We actually should be on points mode for this because we're doing points. And I'm going to click enter, and you'll see what happened here is that we've got a bunch of points that are green, but we should also find some that, I'm going to sort this here. Let me go back to our spreadsheet. Yeah, so they'll have full white values. Because this is a multiplier on top of what's already here, you want full white, because if this became black, if it was zeroed out with the default of 0, 0, 0, the rest of the mesh would turn black, right? Because that's what black would be in color values here. So you'll see some have the written value that we've written here, and then some get the default value if nothing's been written to them. You'll notice that all kinds of things in Houdini, all kinds of nodes will add data in here. If you don't want data in here anymore, you can simply delete it. There is a node called an attribute delete. You can place that down here, and you can delete any node, any attribute that you don't want to be there anymore. So I can delete CD, I can delete test. Now when I middle click over here, we can see that those attributes no longer exist. You can copy attributes. So let's say I'm going to place down a null here. A null is a do nothing operator, so it's just kind of a placeholder here. I'm doing this just to make our branching a little bit easier. And this is our basic pig here. We can copy attributes. So I'm going to place an attribute copy here. and I'm going to copy the color information from this other stream. So right now it, by default, is choosing to copy that attribute labeled CD. So here, if I leave it blank, it's going to try to copy everything, but I can choose what I want to copy. Maybe I just want to copy that test attribute. Maybe I only want to copy CD. Maybe I want to copy a bunch of other stuff in here, right? It's just data being passed back and forth through the program. So that's all we're going to say about it for right now. It's a conceptual thing to understand, and as we do more and more in Houdini, you are going to see a lot of stuff related to attributes and data being passed back and forth and being manipulated.